Hello Econ students, this is a video explaining poverty. This is chapter 13, section 3, and in this we'll explain the definition of poverty and how you go about calculating poverty. We'll also take a look at what we call income distribution and how equal or unequal income is distributed among a society. The first thing we want to take a look at is how you actually define poverty. So poverty is defined as an income for a certain family size. So I can actually be making, let's say, $30,000 and be considered poor if I have a family of 6. Or I could be making $16,000 and not actually be poor if it's just maybe a family of 2. So if we look at this, and you have a family of 2 with 1 child, you have to make more than $15,510. If you're below what we'll call the poverty threshold, then you're poor. If you have a family of 4 with 2 children under 18, then you have to make at least $23,550. That's your poverty threshold. So there's not one level that is defining poverty, but it depends upon your size of family and then your income level. And these amounts don't vary for geography. So I could live in New York City, which is really, really, really expensive to live in, and make $50,000 and not be considered poor, but $50,000 doesn't go very far in New York City. Whereas in Texas, maybe it goes a little bit farther, or rural areas of the country go a little bit farther. So poverty is defined by a poverty threshold, an amount of income a family needs to make, and that varies by size of family, but not by geographic region. The other thing we're going to look at with poverty is income inequality, and there are many reasons for income inequality. Some you're able to control and some you're not able to control. One of the first ones that we want to look at is education and training, and this is what we call human capital. So the more human capital you gain, the more productive you can be, the more money and income that you can make. We'll also call work hours and work effort, work experience, all those things are human capital. The rest of the things on the list are things you can't really control, like discrimination or your age or luck or anything like that, but they do create income inequality within the United States. Some people inherit a bunch of wealth and become very wealthy, not because of education or training, solely because they inherited that wealth. So these are all sources of income inequality. The last thing that we're going to look at, and probably the most confusing thing, is how income is distributed in an economy and how we can go about kind of measuring that and seeing the differences in levels of income among different parts of society. So if we look at the little chart that we have right here, we break society down, or an economy down, into 20% increments. So the lowest fifth is the bottom 20% of income earners. Then we have the next 20% of income earners, the next 20%, the next 20%, and the next 20%. So that's 100% broken down into 20% increments all the way down. So the richest 20% of people are the highest fifth, and the poorest 20% of people are the lowest fifth. Then what we do is we look at them individually. So we say, well, how much income, how much total income does the lowest 20% of people make? Well, they make 3.6%. And the second fifth makes 8.9% of all income. So out of 100% of the income, almost 9% goes to the second fifth, or the bottom fifth of workers. Then we have 14.8% and 23%. And if you look at this, the top 20% make almost 50% of the nation's income. So the top 20%, the top richest percent of people, make nearly 50% of all of the income in the United States. The last column that we'll look at is one that is the cumulative income. So if you have 3.6%, that's 3.6%. The 12.5% that we have right here is adding up the bottom two. So we have a total of 12.5% for the bottom 40% of income earners. So this is 20%, this is the next 20% added to that, and so we have 40% of income earners earn 12.5%. This is 60% of all income earners earn 23%. 80% of all income earners earn 50%. And again, 100% of all income earners earn 100% of the income. What we use those last numbers to do is create what we call the Lorenz curve. I wish it was named after me. It's not. My name is actually Lorenzen. So if we look at the blue line is showing income equality. So if we look at the y-axis, we have the percent of income, And if we look at the x-axis, we have percent of households. So this is our 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, and 100% of households that we talked about before. So our line of equality shows that the bottom 20% of households actually have 20% of the income. Okay, the next 40%, or if we look at the 20% right here, they actually have another 20% of the income. So the cumulative is this blue line right here. So 40% of households have 40% of the income. 60% of households have 60% of the income. And 80% of households have 80%, and 100% of the households have 100%. So if we look at the top fifth, this 20% of households, they have this 20% of income right there. What we want to use the Lorenz curve to do is to see how much income inequality there is. So that's what's going to be the red line. So this red line is going to show income inequality. And we read it the same way as we read the blue line. It just shows income inequality. So our bottom 20% is here. And how much income do they have? Well, they have, if we go up to the red line and over, they have about that 3% of income that we saw before. Then if we look at the next 20%, they'll have a total of, let's call that a total of 10%. So 40% of all households have 10% of the income. So my question is, how much do the second 20% of households have themselves? They themselves have 7%. The bottom 20% have 3%, and the next 20% added to it have a total of 10%. So the second 20% have the difference between those two, which is 7%. And we would keep going to see each's total income. So 60% of households have, let's call that 23% total. For the bottom 60% have 23% total. And then the next 20% have about 45%. And so the richest 20% on this curve right here have about from this point up to that point. So they have from about 45% up to 100%. So they themselves have 55%. This is the thing that's the most confusing for people, but it's really a pretty easy graph to see. This is total percent of income, and this is total percent of households. So you can find each household by finding their kind of part along the curve. So this part along the curve is from about 21% to 45%. So this part along the curve, so that 60 to 80%, they have about 24% of the income for themselves. All right, that's a quick video on income inequality and poverty in the United States. We have a lot of programs that try to fix this, try to create this red line and make it closer to the income line of equality. And so we're not going to talk about all those things, but this is just a quick look at poverty within the United States and income inequality.